welcome to another episode of Your Alright Power Session. I'm your host, Darian Bryant.
And I'm Ray Clark, and today we again have our guest, really our third host, you might as well say.
Yeah.
Stephanie Bradley Blue, clinical therapist.
All day.
We're going to be speaking about emotions and how sometimes they can cloud your judgment, and how to, if you can, not let your emotions cloud your judgment. So I have a phrase or a saying that I say often where I say, don't let your emotions override your intelligence. And when I said that, Joel said to me, hey, sometimes people don't like when you use the word intelligence in reference to, their emotions overriding their intelligence. And I was not clear on that, and I wanted to ask you, is there a reason why I shouldn't say don't let your emotions override your intelligence? Because, that's one of my favorite sayings. I have it written down on a board, and he said that could be considered offensive. I wanted to get your take on that.
I don't know that I would be offended when I hear that. I think what people don't always consider is, or they think because they are intelligent, that in some way if their emotions are off or something like that, that in some way it speaks to their depth of intelligence, right? I can be the smartest person in the world and be mentally ill, and have emotional ups and downs and have all kinds of experiences emotionally once I leave the setting where my intelligence is evoked and be completely internally going through and struggling. People have to disconnect the two. There is such thing as your IQ is your intellect, your ability to perceive information, communicate information, academically, educationally, or in a setting. But there's such thing as an EQ, your emotional intelligence. But that has a lot to do with how you manage and deal with other people. Mm-hmm. Emotional judgment, however, has a lot to do with how your emotions impact, right, what you're experiencing and how you allow it to influence your behaviors in that experience. And so it requires some level of intelligence because our emotions are not always factual. The way that we feel about something is not always factual. Mm-hmm. It could be evoked, like I said, it could be triggered by a past life experience. We could have a negative emotion about something and have nobody in the room has any idea that I'm going through something internally because I walked in and I had an experience with a smell or a color or the way you look.
You could just be hungry.
You could just be hungry, right? Hungry. Exactly.
Did you eat something?
Yeah, and you mad because you know you hungry,
and you
right?
mad, you hangry right now,
right.
For real. Let's be honest.
True.
Yeah,
That's true.
Right. Throwing off all kinds of attitudes, right?
They got a whole Snickers commercial on.
Whole person change up on
facts.
Okay? So those things are different. And so I think when you think about it, it's people being able to take that piece out of there and realize that our feelings are not always factual. And so when you say, don't let your emotions override your intelligence, to be more specific and to the point, it's true. Because our feelings aren't always factual, and at least with intelligence, I can pull on information, right? Factual information, things that I know to be true, things that are validated to say, okay, I need to make this decision based on these truths. In order for you to make good emotional judgment, you got to know that your emotions in that moment are telling you the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I agree. There are a lot of situations where, based on the relationship you have, maybe you're making a emotional decision because of the relationship you have with the individuals involved in the decision, and therefore that's why I use that. I've seen it, especially in family relationships, whether it be a parental and a child or siblings, you might let your emotions come in and say, although I know this person never pays money back, I'm going to give them the money. Although I know this person is irresponsible, I'm going to trust them with something that if you were to just go by the facts or the historicals, you would not make that decision. And that's an emotional decision to me because it's a feel-good decision.
Yeah.
But what do you feel about that, Joe?
I think on the money tip, sometimes when people deal with people like that, you should drop the word borrow down and just give it to them. Because then you won't find yourself upset when they don't give it back. Right. You already know. Hey, I need 500. You know what? You can, don't borrow. Just here you go. You can have that. You know what I'm saying? Because you already know you're not gonna get that back, and it's no need for setting yourself up for failure anyway. So I think that's how you control it down the line. But that's growing, and that's knowing when you're in situations like that, and that's what I believe having control over your emotions is. And as we come up, like you said, we see things differently. What you see and what I see when we look at a certain situation is our growth and what we've both been through. Now, and then you ask both of us our opinion. What you say and what I say is gonna be two different things. You know what I'm saying? But with that, like, you have some people who they billionaires, millionaires, great businessmen. When it comes to making business decisions, perfect. But they're horrible with relationships. They will keep picking the wrong woman or the wrong girl. I mean, or the wrong man. They just bad with that, and their emotions take over. When
So
it comes
does
to
that
But when
speak
it
to-
comes to business, man, ain't no emotions involved. It's either this or this. It's white or black. Ain't no gray situation. But when it comes to relationships, they get all in their feelings, emotions come involved, and they make piss poor decisions. And you ask them, why you don't have this set up yet, and they really can't tell you. They haven't grown in that area. Go ahead.
I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, the difference between your emotional IQ, your EQ, and your EJ, your emotional judgment.
Judgment.
Right, so emotional intelligence, your EQ, is empathic. It's directly related to how you take in information, deal with your emotions, and how you then respond to other people. And a lot of people can be extremely intelligent and capable, but their emotional intelligence be very, very immature. They have not grown in those spaces.
Right.
And so that's why they're relationally not capable, because their EQ is lower, right? But they have decent emotional judgment, which goes back to what you were saying about the money borrowing thing, the difference between like how you are perceive that. Emotional judgment says, I can be offended or choose not to be offended and look at the truth of the matter and accept that this individual has never paid me back.
Right.
So when I give them the money, I know this is not a borrow.
Yeah.
This is me giving it to them.
Yeah.
So this is how I protect my emotions and stay in a positive space and still make a judgment call that I know won't move, that I believe will be helpful for them. You know what I mean? But as it relates to my own emotional space and judgment and protecting myself, it's a matter of acceptance and knowing who I'm working with and being able to make a decision from a clear, truthful place emotionally about who this person is, right?
Right.
To be able to self-protect.
Right.
That's your emotional judgment, right?
Right.
And I think that's the difference, because one is about your ability to protect yourself, be able to be clear after you've made a decision and be all right with it, and still be able to maintain a positive emotional perspective about that person and about moving forward about your own finances or whatever it is. But EQ requires a level of maturity in how you manage and have empathy and have relational value with other people. And some people just don't have that ability. When you have really jacked up, people have pasts and people have issues, and when those things have not been resolved, they're the thing that dictates how we move and how we deal with other people.
I think a way of mastering it is by listening. I think a lot of people, when they get emotionally irate, it's because they're not listening anymore. They close that, and listening not only to yourself, but listening to other people's point of view that you haven't heard before, and don't let what you're saying pretty much overthrow your own. So I think that a lot of people, I think the master of controlling emotions is listening to other people's point of views. One of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are also, I think, scenarios where you're not really fighting the listening aspect. It's just you're making bad decisions. No one's even giving you advice to navigate or take or dismiss. It's just you're making bad decisions, whether it's young girls who are with a boy who keeps cheating on them when they're in high school, but they keep going back to him, or a grown woman in a marriage who keeps going back to a man who's abusing them. It's like their heart is what I mean by that, and when I say their emotions are overriding their intelligence. Like, if he keeps abusing you, what part of you is making you go back? Your emotions.
Okay.
It's definitely not the intelligent side of you that says, oh, I don't like this pain, that makes you go back. It's the emotions or the love or whatever emotion you want to put it under, because sometimes I don't think it's even love. It's just emptiness that you're looking to fill that void. And this is all you know, so you keep going back to all you know.
Emotions is a feeling. So to feel differently, you have to see differently, and to see differently, you have to gain knowledge that you haven't gain the knowledge that you don't have yet.
Right.
You know,
Positivity goes back to like
Exactly.
what we were talking about a couple weeks ago.
that's a bar, by the way. Don't take that.
Positivity.
I gotta tell you.
Yeah, you gotta keep the stand. It's a map. When facing particular issues, it's difficult. And I'll just be really honest and transparent. I was going through something recently over the last few months, an emotional situation, and what happens is when your emotional intelligence is depleted because you're feeling some kind of way about yourself, your self-esteem is being affected, when you have a particular level of fears in your life and you're trying to engage in relationship with others and they take advantage of that in any way, and you're left like feeling very empty, right? It comes a time where you have to make a choice. I can choose to stay in this space, or I can grab a hold of something different, right? And so that positivity comes in and you begin to make different judgments and decisions, not necessarily for the other person. So you turn your IQ, your emotional intelligence off long enough to take yourself out of the situation and grow and emotionally reevaluate. Who am I? What have I become in this situation?
Right.
How has it impacted the way I feel about myself? How has it impacted the way that I'm moving day to day? How are my dreams and the things that I want to do being affected? Am I depressed? Am I feeling poorly about myself? Can you sit down long enough to evaluate where you have lost and where your feelings aren't facts and not speaking to you honestly about who you are, and come to a place of positivity? And I had an awakening the other day, and I was like, shoot, I'm dope. Woke up one day and was just like, I'm dope. And I've been dope for a long time. Like, you know, and I'm not tooting like my horn in a
Nah, toot your horn, you good.
You know, not in an arrogant way, but it was what I had to say to myself.
Confident.
You know, and I had to put the affirmations up on the wall. And I had to do that for a few days and start to look at them on my phone because I had to change the facts that I had been saying to myself for so long. And it was like almost overnight that the decisions that I started to make for myself, not necessarily for that other person.
Right.
My judgment just started to shift.
Right.
I love that you said that, because obviously you're the only female up here, but I found just in my adult life, it's easier sometimes, or seems like it's been easier for the men I've encountered to be, I don't want to say it's selfish, but just loving yourself. It seems easier to love yourself as a man than it is as a woman at times, because maybe the way society is or whatever, but it's like we're more likely to say, I'm not letting no one treat me like that. And it's not even a negotiation. Whereas I've found a lot of times women or females are more apt to let someone mistreat them, because I love me. I've never had a problem with loving me or feeling like I'm less than, and I'm gonna let somebody treat me like I'm less than. I've always been like, it's not happening. Where I don't see that the same way with a lot of women that I've encountered, because it's just like the certain thing. I have a no problem with setting a boundary, no matter the relationship. My child, my mother, my wife. You're not crossing this line. It's going to be a problem.
Right.
And I don't see that same. I don't even know where it comes from. I don't even know why I'm like that. Like sometimes people would say, "Hey, man, you know, Ray, he's not budging." And it's like, yeah, but you knew that. You knew it wasn't. I told you that before at the onset. I gave you the parameters.
Yeah.
And then they're shocked when you don't cave.
I think that's from upbringing and experiences. But I'm gonna let you go ahead.
No, I totally agree with you.
Uh-huh.
I think the other part to that too, though, as women, is when we stand in that space as well, though. You know, I can only speak from my own experience as a black woman. You know, then we also encounter the idea that you're too aggressive, you're this, you're that, so we deal with a lot of, I know I have dealt with a lot of pushback when we get in that confident space, and then there these other darts come at us in different ways. When there's this level of confidence or things that we begin to exude, there's always this place where I've always felt in certain instances in arenas, I have to play down just a little bit, because if I do too much, then they'll take that and the impression of me will go a whole nother way.
I could see that in the work environment, especially. I could totally see that happening.
Having to do that and having to adjust and all the time.
I'm gonna look in the camera and say, don't adjust shit. That's the reason why we keep on getting attacked. Our queens, continue to be who you are. You know what I'm saying? Make them accepted for who you are. Everyone else walk in the door and they accept them for who they are. Accept you for who you are. If you're strong, if you beautiful or intelligent, whatever it is, do not dull your light to fulfill someone else's bullshit.
And don't lower your expectations or standards.
Fuck no.
Just to have somebody.
Fuck no. And our black men need to have our goddamn queens like they have us. Tired of this bullshit. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little.
This is you all right, Howard Sessions.
I'm going back to get him, Howard Sessions. For real, let me go back. Go back, but for real.
No, but we have mothers and daughters and wives that we love, and then when you see situations where I have an adult female child now, and she can make decisions where I'm like, you know better.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many layers to this conversation. I mean, this is such a, it's definitely in keeping with what we're talking about, but it hits very different for me. And so, like I said, I can only speak from my own experience. And that's not true. I have been in multiple arenas. I've had the opportunity to travel internationally and speak to women, different cultures. I will speak of my, when I went to South India a few years ago to do some mission work, I think I was I know that I was the first black woman to ever grace the pulpits of many of those ministers and preachers in churches, right? Mm-hmm. But to stand in the pulpit was even more of an experience for the women in South India, for two reasons. They had never seen anybody that looked like me, and their perception of black women from America was so skewed. When I opened my mouth, before I spoke, they all assumed I was from Africa. When I opened my mouth and I started speaking, they knew I was from America. Mm-hmm. They didn't know we existed. Mm. They didn't know that black women.
That's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
So now you've got all of that, and now I'm standing in the pulpit when all the other women in the church have to stand on the floor to do any kind of presentation. Mm. So now I've become this figure of like, I realize the power that I'm holding in this moment, right? Yeah. Of empowerment for these women. And I could so relate to it, though. Mm-hmm. In that experience and in that moment, I could so relate to it while still having my own experience of perception, right? Their perception of who I was coming into this experience and being this strong, talking to them about surviving breast cancer and they were like, wow, like, it was just like surviving, domestic violence. When I'm looking at women who've been in their country, if a man doesn't want you, the way they try to commit suicide is they dose themselves with kerosene and set themselves on fire. So, I met so many women who were burned from here down or burned from the top of their head because they tried to kill themselves by dousing themselves with kerosene and setting themselves on fire. So when you see that, right, and you experience that, and you realize what it looks like to be unprotected, right, at different levels, in different cultures.
Yes.
I came back feeling very empowered, right? But at the same time, also being able to relate to it in so many ways, not to that depth, but understanding, being able to relate to those women and get how they feel, and it's difficult. It's difficult to find your voice when the world is not okay with it. It really is hard, and it's not that we don't want to be emotional or whatever, but when you've seen it on like an international level, and you've seen it in different spaces, and you've seen women, as second-class citizens, and you've seen it in different spaces.
So it's conditioning.
It really
Society
is.
conditions
it tells
people.
You. It tells you over
it is.
time.
Facts,
it tells
it
you
is.
over time. And you learn your, like I said, I talk about Joyce DeGruy all the time and her post-traumatic slave disorder. If you guys get a chance to look her up, she has phenomenal work on like just the, what the church would call a generational curse, or what we could just say is genetically being predisposed to us as African descendants of slaves in this country. That there are certain things that we are genetically predisposed to, even the way that we deal with one another and how the world sees and perceives us, that have been etched into our DNA, into our character, into our emotional buildup, into the tools and the things that we use on a day-to-day basis to be able to confront and deal with life.
Right.
And so until we unearth and discover those things, right, and begin to really deal with and dig in and say, how are these things continually impacting my life on a day-to-day basis, and allow ourselves to grow and look at life differently. And of course we can take this sunshiny view that life is great, let's get up every day and face it with the, let the sun shine in and face it with the grin, right? But those aren't always our realities. I worked on a job where when I went into the office and I knew I had a particular meeting with a particular group of doctors, I used to have a mohawk. I wore a wig that day.
Right.
Because the level of respect that I got when I wore the straight wig was completely different than when I came in there as the black lady with the mohawk. Something simple as me having to be conscientious of that meeting happens once a month, so I need to change my hair up. I mean, either straighten out my mohawk and wear it straight, or put on a wig. And even when I wore the wig, you look so much more professional.
See, and you bring up an important point.
It's the thing of being accepted and doing what they see as being professional. It's always engulfed on what they see. But go
there's
ahead.
multiple arenas. Like you're talking about the professional and the work environment versus your interpersonal relationships in your life, whether it be your family relationships or romantic relationships or friendships. And I can totally see what you're saying in the work environment with women who may be categorized as being too aggressive or whatever. I don't know the best way to describe it, but I do know what you're saying. Especially there's this bad way that people get looked at, especially black women, where they'll say the angry black woman. I don't want to be seen. I've heard women say, well, I don't want to be seen as the angry black woman, so I'm going to play this down. Now, there are times where there's people who don't care, and they're like, yeah, I am the angry black woman. And I'm going to play it up. But so when it comes to the professional environment or the business world, yes, it's harder for women in general, and then it's doubly hard for black women or women of color. So, but we know that. I mean, it's always harder for anybody brown or darker. It's always harder in the business world. So I was only really thinking about the interpersonal relationships, because those are the ones where I feel like people are overriding their intelligence with emotions, and I don't understand it as much as where in the business environment, I totally understand it. It's for secular reasons. I need this money, I need my job, and I got to get what I got to get from my family.
So I do that, right? So what happens is my emotional judgment says, I know how I have to perform in these spaces. But when I leave that space, I'm hurting because I've had to do that. Right? So now I come home to the people that I care about.
And you lash out.
And either I lash out or I'm looking for something from them, but because they don't understand my experience. Right? Just like, I talk to black men all the time. You guys have experiences. I mean, I can imagine you're legitimate dudes. You're in your car. You're in a nice car. But you got to always be thinking, I might get pulled over.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, that weighs on you emotionally. That you are treated, like, you have to be constantly, that's a pressure.
You know what breaks my heart?
That causes stress. That causes pressure. That affects your emotional space. When you come home, right? To not be able to have a space to talk about that honestly in, and we've not been taught how to really talk about those spaces with each other honestly in, and really give each other the ear that we need to hear each other's experience about, right? We've been more driven apart about that conversation than we are together.
Right.
So, but we're still under the same weight of it. And so then how do we come together and have these conversations? We don't. What we do is we internalize. Right? And then it starts to fester, and it eats away at us in other ways, and then now our emotional judgment is off because we don't know how to look at certain things positively.
Right. And when you hold it in, then you do yourself a disservice physically and mentally. And sometimes your loved one is the one to get it. You know, the one that you're tied to the most. They're the ones that's going to feel it, whether it's the man on the woman or the woman on the man. Is they say one little thing and you're ready to You come home and one thing is out of place. What's this? Right. Because you've been held it in, you let it fester all day. You know, so you have to have more ways to let it out. I used to tell people, if you know you had a bad day before you enter that house, sit in the car for about 10 to 15 minutes, listen to, let that music get you. Because sometimes it's not only your job piss you off, the drive to work, that's a job within itself. That piss you off. So there's no need to get out that car and go straight into the house. Get off that train or whatever and go straight into the house. You're already hyped. You're mad. You're intense. Give yourself some time to unwind. You know what I'm saying? Before you say something to someone, or at least walk through that door. Because sometimes as soon as you walk through that door, you know, the kids don't know. You know, as soon as you walk through that door, or either as soon as you walk through the door, you might have somebody, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? Do that? Hey, yo, can I get my other foot across the threshold?
Kevin Hart has a joke where he says he pulled up and he saw the baby looking at him in the window. So all the time he was like, he drove away.
He drove away. There's a lot of people who they leave and they go to a bar. You know what I'm saying? Now, is that harming them too? Another person might say, yes, that's doing you're harming yourself.
Right. But those are the things we do, though.
But those are the things people do to cope with that, what's going on with them. You know what I'm saying? Also, look at a situation on how much control you have over it. And things, if you can't control that situation, don't let it fester and let it piss you off all day for things that you have no control over.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Control what you can't control. And like for instance, if I'm your boss, or if your boss tell you, I need you to be at work at 5 o'clock, and normally you get there at 7, you know, don't be mad all night and all day mad about the fact that you got to come in.
That is the hardest thing to do. And I say this because there are so many times I'm talking to my wife and I'm saying, hey, you may have left work, but you just gave them 8 hours. Now you're going to give them your night too?
Exactly.
You know, like turning it off and realizing the commodity none of us are getting back is time.
Nah.
And I'm not giving you any more time than I have to.
It's running right
so
now.
It's like when and that's a learned skill. Like I wasn't always able to do that, but I had to learn, like, turn it off, let it go. Because you're robbing yourself of the moment. Because you're thinking about something that's already done.
Yes.
You can't change that. All you have is right now, and you don't even know if you're going to get tomorrow. So enjoy it right now. I'm learning how to master enjoying right now.
Right.
That's what emotional judgment is, and I think that's the crust of what we're discussing in a larger, in a macro sense, right?
Yes.
The idea is making healthy choices versus making unhealthy choices when we're in an emotional space.
Yes.
And being able to determine, is the space that I'm operating out of right now the best? If it's not, then I have to make a healthy choice. That's the hard thing. That's like, choosing between the Big Mac and the smoothie. You understand what I'm saying? That's when you're not feeling good about your life right now. I'm definitely with the Big Mac and the French fries.
You're going to get that Big Mac.
You know what? Food is the number one emotional decision I make. That is not using my intelligence at all. It's my emotions, my taste buds.
Not using the judgment,
do
right?
you really want a cheesesteak?
Yes, I do. I get blood cheesecake because I had a hard day.
Yes, but as soon as you eat it, you're like, I shouldn't have had that, man.
I should have made a smoothie. But that's the reality of our life. That's the thing about emotional judgment. And what we have not learned to do, right?
Right.
And it takes, folks don't want to do the corny stuff. And it goes back to even with relationally, how we deal with one another. If I know, this is something I had to learn to do, like even with my son. My son's tall. I had some issues, like he looks a lot like his father. And I share this story oftentimes. My son looks a lot like his father. And we got through a really rough patch at one point during the pandemic. And he was in therapy. I was going and tipping in and out of therapy with him. And I'm like, we would get to these knockdown drag outs, yo. And when he would stand up at 6'4", I go into trauma mode.
It's a trigger.
Right. Because I'm having flashbacks. So now I'm balling up my fist and we doing it like,
Okay, he a big boy.
okay, on the streets. I'm about to get in a chair and it's going down in the crib, right?
Just the mere fact of him standing
up and doing like this, talking to me now. Like, I'm like, oh, bro.
Body language.
Yes. So, but the reality is, this is where emotional judgment comes in, right?
There you go.
First of all, I need to be able to separate from the fact that this is not my son being disrespectful. The level of anger I'm experiencing right now, the level of struggle I'm experiencing right now, the fact that I want to jump on the chair and fight, is not me responding to my son being disrespectful.
Right.
It is me responding to my triggers.
Got it.
Right? So now, because I know I have an unhealthy emotion, I have to go the extra mile and make a decision to implement a tool to force me into a healthy state.
There you go.
Right? So what I did with him was, when you see me do this, or when I go left, if my language switches all the way up with you, and I go to yoing you to death, and then that hop come in my step, we got to have a trigger word.
Yeah, right.
So now we got to start to implement tools in our lives.
Got to.
Right, to say, because this right here has crossed the regular boundaries of our relationship or relational things between a son and a mom.
Right.
This is a mom's trauma.
Right.
About to interrupt this whole relationship, right?
Right.
So we need to have a word. And so he would say the word when he saw that happen to me. And that would, all you need is a second or a moment to think. And in that moment, my emotional judgment is now being challenged to make a different choice.
That tool is
the tool
another trigger that makes you think.
This is not about him, this is about me.
It's about you.
Right?
Yeah.
And I need to reevaluate and take some steps back. So when he would say the word, it would shut me down long enough to walk away and reevaluate.
Right.
To be able to come back to the matter later and have a conversation about the experience. And to also be able to say to him, these behaviors, these actions, that body language, that does that for me.
Respect.
So that's not me. It's not even about you disrespecting me, that you're doing something intentionally. If I'm pushing your buttons and you do that and you're pushing my buttons, we're not going to go anywhere. Because now my trauma's kicked in and my emotional place is bad.
And what you just said is a great example for people to use throughout all households.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of people who don't want to share what happened in past relationships or when they was young or things of that nature. But if you were open and share with them, then they know, oh, I never knew this. But now that I know, I won't do it again.
That requires good communication and implementation.
Exactly.
And people don't know.
Proper communication goes a long way.
Yeah, and having
That's
the right
a great, I just love that example you gave of where y'all have a word that he can say and it will just change the dynamic of how that would go before it gets too far. You know, and I mean, that's a great example.
Yeah.
That's an awesome
But we
example.
had to do the work, and so that's the part, right? When you know that there are places in your life where your emotions are not, you're just not able to pull up a positive feeling, or something will come and trigger you in a positive way. Sometimes you gotta do the work because you're just not aware to get to that space so that you can be making better decisions and better judgments in how you're dealing with yourself,
Right.
and how you're allowing yourself to be presented to others. Right? And I think that goes across the board. We got to be willing to do the work and make the healthy choices.
True. Meet them halfway, talk about it, converse about it, things of that nature, anything that makes to help you control your emotions it's not, sometimes it takes a village, you know, and that's what you just said right there. So
I could really go on and on. We're about to go over our time. But before we close out, I want to say, like, it's something that you have to work at for the rest of your life, because we don't know what's coming that's going to give us a new emotional situation to have to contend with. I'm a parent, but I'm not yet a grandparent. I might totally lose all my emotional intelligence when that little baby goes, Papa.
You will.
I might.
yeah, no doubt. I got you.
You know,
You
so
won't have any boundaries. There won't be anything going on.
So I will say this. I'm gonna say it again. Echo it one more time. Like I said in the middle, to feel differently, you have to see differently, and to see differently, you have to gain knowledge that you don't have. So don't be afraid to go down that road that's dark, gloomy, and scary. You know what I'm saying? You never know. Your source of knowledge might be down that road. Mm-hmm. It might be the missing seed to what's going on in your life. You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna leave you with that. It's not gonna happen overnight, one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
thank you, Stephanie, again for coming. And always, like always, it's about the community.
It's about the community.
And thanks again for your words of wisdom and giving us another perspective, because, you know, all this testosterone up here is not always going to cut.
It's too much.
I love it.
All right, y'all take it easy. We see you next time.
See you next time.
Peace.